They called her the most beautiful woman who ever lived. But beauty can be a dangerous gift. For centuries, Helen of Troy has been remembered as the woman who caused a war, the face that launched 1,000 ships, the reason countless men died before the walls of Troy. But what if everything we think we know about her is wrong? What if Helen's beauty was never the cause, but the cover? A mask hiding a deeper story about power, politics, and manipulation. This isn't the tale of a woman who destroyed an empire. It's the story of a woman whose myth was built to hide her true strength. Long before Troy burned, a child was born in Sparta. Her mother was Queen Leda. Her father, some said, was Zeus himself, who came to her disguised as a swan. That single detail made Helen half divine and half doomed. From her youth, poets sang of her beauty. Artists tried to capture it, but none could. Kings across Greece dreamed of her face. They didn't see her as a person. They saw her as a prize. When Helen came of age, dozens of rulers arrived in Sparta, each demanding her hand. So many men, so much pride, and one impossible choice. Her stepfather feared bloodshed, so he made the suitors swear an oath. Whoever Helen chose, the rest would protect that marriage with their lives. It sounded noble. It was actually a trap. Helen chose Menelaus, brother of the powerful Agamemnon. The other kings returned home, bound by their oath, bound to her fate. For years, Sparta lived in peace. But peace never lasts long when gods and men share the same story. Then came Paris, Prince of Troy, a man destined to cause disaster. He had once judged a contest between the goddesses. As his reward, Aphrodite promised him the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. That promise was Helen. When Paris arrived in Sparta, legends say Helen fell in love and left with him. Others claim he took her by force. Either way, one morning she was gone. Her absence shattered the peace. Menelaus called upon the oath. Every king who had sworn it gathered their armies. 1,000 ships set sail for Troy, and the greatest war in Greek legend began. For 10 years, they fought. For 10 years, they died. All for Helen. All for love, they said. But does that really sound like love to you? Or was something else happening behind the poetry? Troy wasn't just a city. It was a rival power, rich and strategic. Whoever controlled Troy controlled the trade routes of the ancient world. Helen's abduction was a perfect reason to go to war. A story so emotional, no one would question it. Maybe Helen wasn't the reason the war began. Maybe she was the excuse. And if that's true, the myth becomes something else entirely. A tool of politics disguised as romance. But where was Helen during all this? In Homer's Iliad, she appears only in fragments. Regretful, silent, she blames herself. She calls herself a curse upon men. Why would a daughter of Zeus speak like that? Maybe because her story was written by men who needed her to sound weak. The more helpless Helen appeared, the more heroic their war seemed. But beneath those verses, a different woman hides. A strategist, a survivor, a queen navigating chaos. Some ancient writers whispered an entirely different version of her fate. In that version, Helen never went to Troy at all. The gods, they said, made a phantom of her, an image of mist and air that looked like her. The real Helen was sent to Egypt for her safety. So when Greeks and Trojans fought for 10 years, they fought over an illusion, a shadow. The real Helen watched from afar. If that's true, then the entire Trojan War was fought over a lie. And Helen becomes something far more powerful than a victim. She becomes a mythmaker. Think about it. 2 empires destroyed because of a mirage. A phantom built on the idea of her. That's not weakness. That's influence. When Troy finally fell, Menelaus found Helen alive among the ruins. He lifted his sword to kill her. But the moment he saw her face, he froze. The story says her beauty disarmed him. But maybe it wasn't beauty at all. Maybe it was control. Helen didn't need an army. She didn't need a weapon. Her power was the story itself, and everyone else was trapped inside it. Even after the war, poets couldn't let her go. They called her dangerous, cursed, the downfall of men. They turned her into a warning. But behind every warning, there's a truth someone doesn't want you to see. Helen's story isn't just about love and betrayal. It's about perception. It's about how history treats women who hold too much power. In a world ruled by kings and warriors, Helen's greatest act was survival. She became an idea, and ideas don't die. The Greeks won their war, but Helen's name outlived every one of them. Her legend became eternal, not because she was beautiful, but because she was unforgettable. Maybe that's the real reason her story endures. Not because she was the face that launched 1,000 ships, but because she was the mind that made 1,000 men believe she was worth launching them for. And maybe, just maybe, that was her true power all along. For centuries, Helen of Troy has been remembered as a symbol of beauty, but beauty was never her only weapon. Behind the legend hides a far greater force, a kind of power the ancient world feared but could never destroy. Because Helen wasn't just a queen, she was a daughter of Zeus, and that made her part divine. In ancient Greece, being born from a god wasn't just mythology. It meant destiny. It meant you were part of the cosmic balance between chaos and order. Helen's divine blood gave her more than beauty. It gave her influence, a presence that shaped the hearts and minds of those around her. Even the gods seemed drawn to her. In myth, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite fought over who was the fairest. That argument set off a chain of events that would burn an empire. Helen didn't start that fight, but she became its center, its prize, its prophecy. To the Greeks, beauty wasn't just appearance. It was proof of divine favor. To be beautiful was to be chosen by the gods, and Helen embodied that ideal more than anyone else. But divine favor is a dangerous gift. It breeds envy, fear, and obsession. Men claimed her, poets shaped her, gods used her, and through it all, Helen learned how to use the myths surrounding her. Imagine living in a world where your face could start wars, where kings saw you as a symbol, not a person. Helen understood that her image held power, and she learned to control it. Some ancient sources suggest that Helen didn't just endure her fate. She navigated it. She used perception as her weapon. When armies gathered in her name, she realized the greatest influence wasn't on the battlefield. It was in the minds of those who believed her story. Helen became a master of silence. She didn't need to speak to control a room. Her presence did it for her. Men projected their desires, fears, and pride onto her. She became their mirror. That's why her legend never dies, because everyone sees what they want to see in Helen. In Egypt, where some say she hid during the Trojan War, Helen was treated not as a captive, but as a goddess. Ancient accounts describe her as serene, untouchable, her beauty still otherworldly, but her demeanor calm. A woman in control of her fate, waiting for the world's chaos to pass. It's as if Helen had transcended the war entirely. While kings and heroes died for her shadow, the real Helen watched from a distance, untouched by their rage. That is not helplessness. That's power of a different kind, subtle, psychological, divine. Helen's hidden power wasn't in what she did. It was in what others believed she could do. The Greeks feared her influence. They blamed her for their suffering, but they couldn't destroy her image. Even in their hatred, they immortalized her. And immortality is the highest form of power. To control the narrative is to control history. Helen became a story the world couldn't stop telling. And stories outlast empires. But let's look deeper. What if Helen's myth wasn't just about her? What if it was a reflection of something larger? A truth about how power moved through the world. Every empire needs a symbol. Every war needs a cause. Helen became both. Through her, the Greeks justified their invasion. Through her, poets justified their glory. And through her, the gods justified their interference in mortal lives. But the real Helen, the thinking, breathing woman behind the myth, remained untouchable. A living paradox, blamed by all, controlled by none. In many ways, Helen represents the oldest form of influence, soft power. The ability to move men, not by force, but by fascination. While warriors like Achilles and Hector died for honor, Helen shaped destiny with silence. She didn't win battles. She made them happen. Even the gods respected that kind of control. Aphrodite, goddess of love, may have guided Helen's path, but Helen turned love itself into a weapon. She taught the world that desire could be more destructive than any army. And that is why her story endures. Consider this. When the war finally ended and Menelaus found her again, he didn't see guilt, he saw divinity. He couldn't kill her, even after all the loss. Some say the gods intervened. Others say her gaze stopped him. Whatever the reason, her survival wasn't luck. It was inevitability. Because myths don't die. And Helen had already become one. As centuries passed, new poets tried to redeem her, while others condemned her again. But none could escape her gravity. In every retelling, Helen became a reflection of the age that spoke her name. To the Greeks, she was a curse. To the Romans, a warning. To modern eyes, perhaps a mystery that still refuses to fade. Each era reshaped her, but she remained untouchable. That's what makes her dangerous. Because true power isn't about controlling people. It's about being impossible to define. Helen blurred the line between mortal and divine, between woman and myth, between victim and mastermind. And that's why she survives. Not as a person, as a phenomenon. The Trojan War may have ended, Troy may have burned. But Helen's legend continues to rewrite itself, generation after generation. Maybe that's her revenge, to live forever as a question no one can answer. Who was Helen of Troy? A goddess's daughter? A queen who sparked the war? Or the first woman in history to understand that power doesn't need to shout, it only needs to be seen? The fires of Troy had faded. The heroes were dead. The war songs turned into echoes. But Helen's story was just beginning. In the ashes of a fallen empire, her image rose again, not as a woman, but as an idea. The Greeks returned home carrying her name like a curse. Every poet who survived that war needed someone to blame. And Helen was the perfect choice. A woman too beautiful to be human, too divine to be mortal, and too dangerous to be forgotten. When Homer wrote the Odyssey, he gave Helen a strange kind of peace. There she sits in a palace of quiet wealth, weaving tapestries of forgotten battles. She remembers the men who died for her, but she speaks of them with calm, as if she has seen beyond their tragedy. It's as though Homer himself didn't know what to do with her. She was too powerful for the role of victim, too enigmatic for the role of villain. So he left her in mystery, a living ghost of a war that reshaped the world. But not all poets agreed. Euripides, the dramatist, dared to write a different version. In his play Helen, the real Helen never went to Troy at all. He claimed the gods had sent a phantom in her place, a copy made of air and divine deception. The real Helen, he said, was hidden safely in Egypt the entire time. That version changed everything. If true, Helen was not the cause of war. She was its excuse. It wasn't her face that launched 1,000 ships. It was human pride, human greed, human myth-making. Euripides turned Helen into something more than mortal beauty. He turned her into a symbol of illusion, a warning about how stories create our realities. And maybe he was right, because Helen's greatest power wasn't her face. It was her ability to exist as an idea, shifting with every generation that spoke her name. In Sparta, temples rose in her honor. priests offered her sacrifices. Sailors prayed to her for safe passage across the Aegean. Imagine that the woman once blamed for war became a goddess of peace and protection. To the Spartans, she was Helen the Divine, a spirit of renewal and rebirth. Her myth had come full circle. The same beauty that once caused destruction was now believed to bring good fortune. But time moved on. Empires rose and fell, and Helen, ever silent, adapted. When the Romans inherited Greek culture, they also inherited her myth. Yet they saw her differently. To them, Helen wasn't divine. She was dangerous. Roman writers warned against her, a reminder that desire could destroy nations, that one woman's allure could topple men of power. They admired her beauty, but feared her legend. Then came the Middle Ages. Christian scholars looked back at Greek myths and tried to fit them into their moral world. Helen became a symbol of temptation, a warning whispered to kings and knights. They called her sinful, faithless, a cautionary tale of what happens when men follow beauty instead of God. Yet even then, her name refused to fade. Even as they condemned her, they couldn't stop writing about her. That's the paradox of Helen. Even her enemies kept her immortal. By the time the Renaissance dawned, artists rediscovered her again, but this time they worshipped her. Painters filled their canvases with her image. Poets revived her name as the embodiment of perfection. She was reborn as the ideal woman, not of sin, but of art. Helen became the muse of the modern age, a reminder that beauty could inspire creation as easily as destruction. And once again, she stood beyond judgment, neither cursed nor blessed, but eternal. In every age, Helen reflects the world that imagines her. To warriors, she is a cause. To poets, a muse. To philosophers, a riddle. To the modern mind, perhaps, a warning about how stories define truth. Because Helen's story isn't just about the past. It's about power. Who holds it, who tells it, and who gets to be remembered. Think of this. Thousands of years later, we still argue about her. Was she kidnapped or complicit? Did she love Paris, or was she cursed? Was she divine, or simply a victim of myth? Every answer says more about us than her. That's Helen's secret. She doesn't give answers, she provokes them. And as long as she does, she never truly die. Modern scholars now study her not as a legend, but as a cultural phenomenon, a symbol of how women in history have been mythologized, praised, and blamed in equal measure. Some see her as the first victim of propaganda. Others see her as the first master of it. Maybe both are true. Maybe that's what makes her story timeless. Because Helen teaches one lesson above all: the power of image. In a world of armies and empires, she ruled through perception. She showed that ideas can shape history more than swords ever could. Today, we live in a world of images again. Screens, icons, illusions. Perhaps that's why Helen feels so modern. Because we're still fighting wars over what we see and what we believe is real. In the end, Helen of Troy isn't just a myth. She's a mirror. When we look at her, we see ourselves, our desires, our fears, our obsessions. That's why her legend endures. Because Helen isn't trapped in the past. She's alive in every story that questions power, beauty, and truth. Maybe that's her final form. Not a queen, not a goddess, but a symbol of how history never stops repeating itself. And as long as humans crave beauty, as long as they build myths to explain desire, Helen will be there, watching, waiting, smiling through the centuries. Centuries have passed since the last songs of Troy faded into silence. But Helen's name still echoes. Through art, through language, through time itself. She refuses to die. Because Helen of Troy was never just a person. She was a symbol born from the oldest human emotion, the desire to make sense of beauty. In every generation, her image transforms. Painters reinvent her face. Writers give her new voices. Scholars argue about what she meant. But none of them can claim her fully, because Helen doesn't belong to any single version of history. She belongs to the human imagination itself. In the 19th century, artists like Evelyn de Morgan painted her not as a temptress, but as a woman trapped between gods and fate, a victim of the myths written around her. Later, feminist writers reclaimed her again. They asked, why blame Helen for the arrogance of kings? Why should a woman carry the guilt of a war men chose to fight? They saw in her a reflection of countless women across history, judged, idealized, misunderstood. And suddenly, Helen wasn't a warning anymore. She was a question, a symbol of resistance against the stories that tried to contain her. Every age reinvents her myth to suit its fears and desires. To the ancients, she was divine beauty. To the Romans, dangerous lust. To the Christians, temptation. To modern thinkers, an allegory for power and perception. She keeps changing form, and that's what makes her immortal. Even today, Helen appears in films, novels, games, and art installations. Her face, imagined 1,000 ways, still sells the illusion of perfection. But look closer, and you'll see the pattern repeating. The same question whispered through centuries. Can beauty ever exist without power? Can power ever exist without consequence? Some modern scholars say Helen represents the birth of celebrity, a person turned into a myth by public obsession, a name so famous that the real human vanished beneath the legend. Sound familiar? It should, because we live in the same world now, one where image defines identity and perception shapes reality. Helen isn't ancient history. She's prophecy. Every time a face goes viral, every time a story spins out of control, we repeat the same ritual the Greeks began with Helen. We turn people into symbols. We turn admiration into obsession. We turn stories into wars of opinion. And just like Helen, those symbols live longer than the truth ever could. Perhaps that's why the myth still haunts us, because deep down, we know it isn't about Troy anymore. It's about us. About how humans create gods out of their desires and monsters out of their mistakes. Helen became both. And in doing so, she revealed something terrifying about human nature, that we need myths to explain ourselves. Think of how the poets described her, a face that launched 1,000 ships. But ships don't sail for faces. They sail for pride, for vengeance, for glory disguised as love. Helen was just the spark. The fire was already there. And that's why her legend endures, because she shows us how easily beauty becomes the excuse for ambition. Yet beneath all that, there's still a human heartbeat. Somewhere within the myth, there was once a woman, a daughter, a queen, a survivor. Someone who watched empires rise and burn in her name. Someone who understood that silence could be more powerful than any army. And maybe, in that silence, she finally found peace. When the ancients built temples to her, they weren't just worshiping beauty. They were worshiping memory. Helen became their way of remembering the cost of desire and the fragility of truth. To honor Helen was to acknowledge the chaos within the human heart. To fear her was to admit how easily men destroy what they love. But the legend didn't end in marble and myth. It evolved into metaphor. Today, Helen stands for everything elusive. The perfect image, the unattainable dream, the eternal question of whether beauty is gift or curse. And that's why she's still alive in our culture, because we never stop chasing her. In the end, Helen of Troy outlived her city, her war, her poets, her kings. She even outlived her gods. She became what every mortal secretly longs to become, a story that never fades. She doesn't need temples anymore. The world itself became her altar. Every time her name is spoken, the myth breathes again. Maybe that's what immortality truly means. Not eternal life, but eternal relevance. Helen achieved that not through conquest, but through meaning. She became the thread that connects the ancient and the modern, a mirror that forces us to ask who we are and what we worship. So when we speak her name today, we aren't remembering a woman. We're remembering an idea. The idea that beauty can topple empires, that desire can shape destiny, that the stories we tell can outlive every one of us. Helen of Troy was never just the face that launched 1,000 ships. She was the question that launched 1,000 stories. And maybe that was her true revenge, to become the one thing the world could never control, eternal. In the end, Helen immortal, the myth that refuses to die.